The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine walkway of JFK International Airport's private aviation terminal. Dr. Maya Richardson pulled up to the terminal in her dark blue Tesla, 15 minutes earlier than planned. She smiled, remembering how her grandmother always said, "Early is on time is late." At 42 years old, Maya had built her life around such simple but powerful wisdom. As she stepped out of her car, her heels clicked confidently against the polished floor. The terminal's glass walls reflected her image. A woman dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, her natural hair styled in a neat professional updo, and her leather briefcase containing the keynote speech she would deliver at the Los Angeles Medical Conference in a few hours. A young valet approached with a friendly smile, offering to park her car. Maya handed him her keys, thanking him warmly. She had done this routine dozens of times before, the same terminal, the same charter company, even the same flight crew most times. As one of the country's leading neurosurgeons, private flights had become a practical necessity rather than a luxury, allowing her to balance her busy surgery schedule with speaking engagements across the country. Maya checked her phone, scrolling through her morning messages. There was a text from her daughter Zara, a junior in college, wishing her good luck for the speech. Another message popped up from the hospital. Her patient from yesterday's complicated brain surgery was recovering well. The news made her smile. It was cases like these that reminded her why she had chosen this challenging path. The terminal was quieter than usual this morning. A few business executives sat in the waiting area, absorbed in their laptops and phones. The coffee shop in the corner filled the air with the rich aroma of freshly ground beans. Maya made a mental note to grab her usual green tea before boarding, a little ritual she had developed over years of frequent travel. She approached the check-in counter, her credentials and booking information already pulled up on her phone. The familiar face of Sandra, the usual morning receptionist, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a new security guard stood near the entrance, his posture stiff and his eyes scanning the terminal with an intensity that seemed out of place in the usually relaxed atmosphere. Maya pulled her pilot-approved identification card from her wallet, the one she'd used countless times before. Her medical license and hospital ID were tucked neatly behind it, though she rarely needed to show them here. The charter company knew her well. She'd flown with them at least twice a month for the past 3 years. Her carry-on contained everything she needed for the one-day trip. Her laptop with the presentation slides, a change of clothes, her mother's voice in her head reminding her to always be prepared, and the lucky pen her late father had given her when she graduated from medical school. She had used it to sign every important document since then, including the papers for her first private practice. The morning light streamed through the terminal's high windows, creating patterns on the floor that reminded Maya of the hospital corridors during sunrise. She loved those quiet morning moments before the rush of the day began. They gave her time to think, to prepare, to center herself before taking on whatever challenges lay ahead. She checked her watch, still plenty of time before her 9:30 a.m. flight. The conference organizers had offered to book her a commercial first-class ticket, but Maya preferred the flexibility of private flights. They allowed her to return the same day if needed, something crucial for a surgeon who could be called back for emergencies. As she walked toward the security checkpoint, Maya mentally rehearsed key points from her upcoming speech about innovative techniques in pediatric neurosurgery. Her research had shown promising results, and she was excited to share them with her colleagues. This conference could mean new hope for countless young patients. Little did she know that this routine morning was about to become anything but ordinary. The new security guard's gaze had fixed upon her, his expression shifting in a way she had seen too many times before. Maya straightened her spine, took a deep breath, and continued walking forward with the dignity and grace that had carried her through countless similar moments in her journey to the top of her field. Security guard Thomas Wells stood with his feet planted wide, his new uniform still stiff and crisp. After 10 years working at shopping malls, this job at the private aviation terminal was his big break. He had been there just 2 weeks, and already he had decided this place needed stricter security. These rich people, he thought, needed someone to keep them in line. When he spotted Dr. Richardson walking toward the checkpoint, Wells straightened his back and adjusted his badge. Something about her confident walk bothered him. He had seen many wealthy people pass through these doors, but they didn't usually look like her. Without hesitation, he stepped directly into her path. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification," Wells said, his voice louder than necessary in the quiet terminal. He noticed a few heads turned their way, exactly the audience he wanted. Dr. Richardson calmly reached into her briefcase and pulled out her credentials. Of course, she said, handing over her pilot-approved ID card, charter flight documentation, and medical license. I'm Dr. Maya Richardson. I have a 9:30 flight to Los Angeles. Wells took his time examining each document, holding them up to the light even though they had clear security holograms. And how did you book this flight? He asked, his tone suggesting he already doubted her answer. I've been flying with this charter company for 3 years now, Dr. Richardson explained patiently. You can check with the front desk. They know me well. Oh, I'm sure they do, Wells said with a smirk. But I'm new here, and I need to be extra careful about security. He emphasized the last word while giving her expensive suit a suspicious once-over. More people in the terminal had stopped what they were doing to watch. A businessman lowered his newspaper. 2 women at the coffee shop whispered to each other, their faces showing concern. Is there a problem here? Dr. Richardson asked, keeping her voice steady. She had dealt with similar situations before, but it never got easier. Well, that depends, Wells said, now holding her medical license like it might be fake. We get a lot of important people through here, real important people. I just need to make absolutely sure you belong. Dr. Richardson felt her heart rate increase, but her expression remained professional. I understand you're doing your job, Mr. Wells, she said, reading his name tag, but I've shown you all the required documentation. Is there something specific you need to verify? Wells pulled out a thick security manual from his back pocket. Actually, there is. For certain situations. We need additional verification. Maybe a call to the hospital, or better yet, why don't you tell me the name of your supervisor there? A young woman nearby had taken out her phone and was quietly recording the interaction. An older gentleman in a business suit had stood up, frowning as he watched the scene unfold. Mr. Wells, Dr. Richardson said, her voice clear and firm, I am a board-certified neurosurgeon heading to a medical conference where I'm the keynote speaker. I've shown you multiple forms of identification, all of which exceed your standard requirements. I fly from this terminal regularly. Now, I'd appreciate you either clearing me through security or calling your supervisor to resolve this situation. Wells crossed his arms, blocking her path more firmly. Oh, so now you're telling me how to do my job. Maybe we should call the police, let them verify your story. The terminal had grown very quiet. Everyone could hear the absurdity in Wells' voice, the barely hidden satisfaction as he continued to abuse his authority. A few more phones had come out, recording the incident. Dr. Richardson stood her ground, neither backing down nor losing her composure. She had worked too hard, helped too many patients, and broken too many barriers to let this man shake her dignity. Yes, she said calmly, pulling out her phone. Let's call someone. In fact, let's call several people. Your supervisor, the charter company management, and my lawyer, who I'm sure would be very interested in documenting this entire interaction. While we wait for them, perhaps you could explain to everyone here exactly what kind of additional verification you require and why. The young woman who had first started recording gave a quiet yes, under her breath. Other passengers had begun to stand up, moving closer, their faces showing a mix of concern and support. But before Wells could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Captain David Chen's voice cut through the tense atmosphere like a knife. Is there a problem here? He asked, walking briskly toward the scene. As the lead pilot for the charter company, he had flown Dr. Richardson to countless medical conferences over the past 3 years. Wells turned, his face reddening at the sight of the captain's uniform, but instead of backing down, he puffed up his chest even more. Just doing my job, sir. Running some extra security checks on this person claiming to be a doctor. The crowd in the terminal had grown larger. Sarah Martinez, a flight attendant who had served on many of Dr. Richardson's flights, pushed through the gathering of onlookers. She held her phone up, already dialing the terminal manager's number. That's Dr. Maya Richardson, Sarah said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. She's performed life-saving surgery on 3 of our pilot's family members. She's probably the most respected passenger we have. More phones appeared in the crowd. A young college student named Jamie was already live streaming the incident, her hands shaking with anger as she narrated quietly into her phone. This is happening right now at GFA's private terminal. A security guard is blocking a black female doctor from boarding her flight. Dr. Richardson maintained her dignified stance, but her eyes showed the weight of the moment. She had faced discrimination before, in medical school, in hospitals, even in grocery stores, but this was different. This time, people weren't looking away. This time, they were watching, recording, speaking up. An elderly woman in a wheelchair, Mrs. Patricia Thompson, rolled forward. "Young man," she addressed Wells sharply, "I've been sitting here watching you harass this lady for 15 minutes. I may be old, but I know wrong when I see it. Shame on you." Wells started to look uncomfortable as more people joined the group. A businessman in an expensive suit stepped forward, his British accent crisp and clear. "I fly through this terminal twice a week," he announced. "Never once have I been asked for additional verification. Never once have I seen this level of scrutiny applied to anyone else." Captain Chen moved to stand beside Dr. Richardson. "As the pilot of this flight, I can personally vouch for Dr. Richardson's identity. She's been my passenger dozens of times. This stops now, Mr. Wells." But Wells, perhaps realizing his job was now on the line, doubled down. "I have authority to conduct security checks as I see fit," he insisted, his voice growing louder. "And I say something's not right here. Maybe you all should be questioned too, taking her side so quick." Two other security guards, both veterans at the terminal, exchanged glances. One of them, Officer Rodriguez, stepped forward. "Wells, you need to stand down. This isn't protocol, and you know it." The terminal manager, Ms. Helen Brooks, finally arrived, having been alerted by multiple calls. She took in the scene, the crowd of angry passengers, the phones recording everything, Dr. Richardson's calm but resolute stance, and Wells' aggressive posture. "Mr. Wells," Ms. Brooks said firmly, "step aside immediately. Dr. Richardson is a valued client, and your behavior is completely unacceptable." The young college student's livestream counter hit 1,000 viewers. Comments flooded in, with people demanding action and accountability. Someone in the crowd mentioned that the video was already being shared on multiple social media platforms. Dr. Richardson looked at her watch. She still had a conference to get to, lives to save, knowledge to share. But she also recognized that this moment was bigger than her schedule. This was about every person who had ever been profiled, questioned, or made to feel less than worthy of occupying a space. She turned to address the crowd, her voice clear and measured. The terminal fell silent, phone still recording, as everyone waited to hear what she would say. Even Wells, who had finally stepped aside under Ms. Brooks' stern gaze, couldn't help but watch. The morning sun streamed through the terminal's windows, creating a subtle glow around Dr. Richardson as she prepared to transform this moment of discrimination into an opportunity for change. The crowd leaned in, ready to hear words that they somehow knew would be worth sharing, worth remembering, worth acting upon. Dr. Richardson looked at the faces surrounding her, young and old, different races and backgrounds, all united in this moment. She took a deep breath and began to speak in a clear, steady voice that carried naturally through the hushed terminal. "What's happening here today is nothing new," she said. "It happens in hospitals where patients question if I'm really their doctor. It happens in parking lots where people ask if I'm lost. It happens in stores, restaurants, and yes, even in private terminals." The crowd listened intently. The young college student's livestream counter now showed over 5,000 viewers. Wells stood awkwardly to the side, his face red, as his fellow security officers kept watchful eyes on him. "But what's different today," Dr. Richardson continued, "is all of you. You didn't look away. You didn't pretend it wasn't happening. You chose to stand up, to record, to speak out. That's how change begins." Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman in the wheelchair, wiped tears from her eyes. "We're with you, Doctor," she said softly, and several others nodded in agreement. Terminal manager Ms. Brooks stepped forward. "Dr. Richardson, on behalf of the entire airport and charter company, I want to apologize for this inexcusable treatment. Mr. Wells," she turned to the guard, her voice firm, "you are suspended effective immediately. Please turn in your badge and leave the premises." Wells started to protest, but Officer Rodriguez cut him off. "Don't make this worse for yourself, man. Just go." As Wells was escorted out by his former colleagues, Captain Chen addressed the gathered crowd. I've been flying Dr. Richardson to save lives across the country for 3 years. She's performed emergency surgery on my own nephew. This kind of discrimination has no place in our terminal or anywhere else. Sarah, the flight attendant, had been busy making calls. She approached Dr. Richardson with a smile. Doctor, the charter company CEO is on the line. He wants to speak with you personally, and he's already announced mandatory anti-bias training for all staff members. The British businessman who had spoken up earlier stepped forward. Dr. Richardson, I'm on the board of 3 major hospitals. Would you be willing to share your experience at our next healthcare equity conference? We need to make sure this story reaches the right ears. More people from the crowd began sharing their own stories. A young Asian woman talked about being questioned at her law firm. An older Middle Eastern man described similar experiences at high-end hotels. The terminal had become a space for honest conversation about everyday discrimination and the importance of standing against it. Jamie, the college student who had been live streaming, approached Dr. Richardson nervously. My mom's a nurse, she said, and she always wanted to be a doctor but gave up because of experiences like this. Would you mind if I shared your words with her? You're trending on social media right now, and people are really listening. Dr. Richardson smiled warmly at the young woman. Share it with everyone, she said. This moment isn't just about me. It's about all of us choosing to do better, to be better. Ms. Brooks returned with news. Dr. Richardson, we've upgraded your flight status to permanent VIP, and the company is creating new security guidelines to prevent profiling. Would you be willing to review them before we implement them? The terminal, which had been a place of tension just moments ago, now buzzed with positive energy and purpose. People exchanged contact information, made plans for follow-up actions, and committed to staying vigilant against discrimination in their own workplaces. Captain Chen checked his watch. Dr. Richardson, whenever you're ready, we can take off. Your conference attendees should hear about this too. As Dr. Richardson gathered her belongings, now helped by several eager staff members, she noticed how the morning sun had shifted. It no longer cast shadows but filled the terminal with clear, bright light. Sometimes, she thought, it takes a moment of darkness to bring people into the light. The crowd parted respectfully as she walked toward her gate, but this time it wasn't just a walk to a plane. It was a walk toward change, supported by a community that had chosen to stand together against injustice. By the time Dr. Richardson's flight took off, the video of the incident had spread across every major social media platform. Jamie's livestream alone had reached over 50,000 views, and other passengers' recordings were being shared by celebrities and civil rights organizations. During the flight, Sarah, the flight attendant, showed Dr. Richardson her phone, where messages of support were pouring in from around the world. Look at this, Sarah said, scrolling through comments. A group of medical students in Chicago is organizing a discussion about discrimination in healthcare because of your story. Captain Chen called from the cockpit through the intercom. Dr. Richardson, you might want to know that the Los Angeles conference organizers have seen the videos. They've adjusted the schedule to give you time to address this incident in your keynote speech, if you're willing. Dr. Richardson sat in her comfortable leather seat, thinking about how to use this moment wisely. She opened her laptop and began adding to her presentation, knowing that sometimes the most important lessons happen outside the operating room. Back at JFK, the terminal was buzzing with activity. Ms. Brooks had called an emergency staff meeting where she played the videos of the incident. This is not who we are, she told her employees. But more importantly, this is not who we will continue to be. Officer Rodriguez shared his perspective with his fellow security officers. I stayed quiet too many times before, he admitted. Watching someone else do wrong and saying nothing, that makes us part of the problem. Today taught me that speaking up matters. The British businessman, who turned out to be Dr. James Wilson from the Hospital Administration Board, was already drafting a proposal for new industry-wide guidelines. He remembered how his own daughter, a young black doctor in London, had faced similar challenges. Mrs. Thompson, still in the terminal waiting for her own flight, had called her grandson, a journalist at a major news network. Listen carefully, she told him. I just witnessed something that needs to be told properly. This isn't just about one incident, it's about how we all choose to respond when we see injustice. Jamie's video continued to gain traction. Social media experts noted how different this was from other viral videos of discrimination. This shows the power of community response. One commentator wrote, "Instead of just recording tragedy, we're seeing people actively intervening, supporting, and creating change." By early afternoon, the charter company's CEO had issued a formal statement. "What happened this morning at our JFK terminal was unacceptable. We are implementing immediate changes to ensure all passengers are treated with the respect they deserve. Dr. Richardson has graciously agreed to help us revise our training protocols." The story took another turn when other professionals began sharing similar experiences using the hashtag #MyProfessionalSpace. A black female judge described being mistaken for a clerk. A Latino architect talked about being questioned at his own construction site. An Asian female tech CEO shared stories of being asked if she was the assistant. Sarah created a group chat with the witnesses from the terminal, keeping everyone updated on the growing impact of their collective stand. "The company just announced mandatory bias training for all employees," she messaged. "And they're creating a passenger bill of rights to be displayed in all terminals." As Dr. Richardson's plane crossed the country, more news developed. The airport administration announced a review of all security protocols. Civil rights organizations offered to provide free training. Other airports began reaching out, wanting to proactively address similar issues. Mrs. Thompson's grandson's news story went live, featuring interviews with several witnesses. The headline read, "Private Terminal Incident Sparks National Conversation on Active Allyship." When Dr. Richardson landed in Los Angeles, she found a different world waiting. The conference organizers had adjusted the schedule, understanding that while brain surgery was important, this teachable moment was equally vital. Sometimes healing wasn't just about medical procedures, it was about healing the deeper wounds in society. Her phone buzzed with a message from her daughter Zara. "Mom, you're trending for all the right reasons. My whole campus is talking about what happened. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you showed everyone how to stand up for each other." Within 24 hours of the incident, the videos had gone viral in ways nobody expected. Jamie's original livestream had reached over 2 million views, and news channels were playing clips from different angles captured by other passengers. But this wasn't just another viral moment, it was becoming a movement. Dr. Richardson's medical conference speech was being live-streamed, something that had never happened before. She stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that had doubled in size as hospital administrators and medical staff from across Los Angeles came to hear her speak. "Yesterday, I was going to talk only about new techniques in neurosurgery," she began. "Today, we need to discuss something just as important: how we treat each other in professional spaces." The audience listened intently as she shared not just the terminal incident, but 15 years of similar experiences in hospitals. She talked about patients who refused to believe she was their doctor, nurses who questioned her authority, and security guards who stopped her in hospital parking lots. Back in New York, the charter company was facing a flood of media attention. Instead of hiding from it, they decided to lead by example. The CEO, Michael Stewart, appeared on morning news shows to announce major changes. "We're not just apologizing," Stewart said firmly. "We're making real changes. Starting today, we're working with civil rights organizations to completely revise our training. Dr. Richardson has agreed to be part of our advisory board, and we're creating a scholarship program for minority students in aviation." The fired security guard, Thomas Wells, tried to defend himself on social media, but his posts only sparked more discussion about everyday discrimination. His previous employers came forward, revealing similar incidents that had gone unreported. Jamie, the college student who recorded the live stream, was invited to speak at her university's journalism class. "I always thought recording injustice was enough," she told her classmates. "But Dr. Richardson showed me that it's what happens next that really matters." Sarah, the flight attendant, started a private Facebook group for airline staff to discuss similar experiences. Within days, it had over 10,000 members sharing stories and suggestions for change. Airlines began reaching out, wanting to learn more about preventing discrimination. Mrs. Thompson's grandson's news story won the evening ratings. Other networks rushed to cover different angles: the role of bystanders, the power of social media, the importance of speaking up. But more importantly, people were sharing their own stories. The hashtag my professional space continued trending, with professionals from all backgrounds sharing experiences. Security followed me around my own art gallery opening. Famous black artist. A patient asked to see the real doctor while I was doing their consultation. Asian pediatrician. Client assumed I was the janitor at my own law firm. Latino attorney. Dr. Richardson's daughter Zara organized a student forum at her college. My mom's experience went viral, she told the packed auditorium, but this happens every day. The difference is now people are watching, recording, and speaking up. The British businessman, Dr. Wilson, presented his new guidelines at an emergency meeting of the Hospital Administration Board. This isn't just about airports or hospitals, he explained. It's about creating spaces where everyone's professional status is respected. Officer Rodriguez received hundreds of messages from other security officers thanking him for speaking up. He began working with the airport to create a See Something, Say Something program, not just for suspicious packages, but for discrimination too. Major companies started calling the charter company, wanting to learn from their response. Instead of hiding the incident, they had acknowledged it, learned from it, and made real changes. HR departments across the country began updating their training materials. Ms. Brooks, the terminal manager, put up a new sign in the terminal. Everyone who belongs here belongs here. Simple words, but they carried weight. Similar signs started appearing in other terminals, hospitals, and office buildings. As evening fell on the second day, Dr. Richardson finished her conference in Los Angeles. Her phone buzzed with messages from old professors, colleagues, and patients, all sharing how her stand had inspired them to make changes in their own spaces. The terminal incident had lasted less than an hour, but its impact was just beginning. Sometimes, the biggest changes start with one person standing their ground, others choosing to stand with them, and everyone deciding that enough is enough. 1 month after the incident, Dr. Richardson returned to JFK's private terminal for another flight. The changes were immediately visible. New signs welcomed travelers in multiple languages, and the security staff was noticeably more diverse. The real changes went much deeper. Ms. Brooks greeted Dr. Richardson with a warm smile. "Would you like to see what we've accomplished?" she asked, leading the way to a newly created training room. Inside, a group of security officers was attending a session led by Officer Rodriguez. Remember, Rodriguez was saying to the group, "Our job isn't just to check IDs. It's to make every passenger feel safe and respected." On the wall behind him hung photos of successful professionals from various backgrounds, including one of Dr. Richardson. The charter company had transformed its entire approach to security. Every staff member now wore a badge that read, "Respect First," under their name. Sarah, the flight attendant who had supported Dr. Richardson, had been promoted to head of customer relations. "We've trained over 500 staff members in the new protocols," Sarah explained, showing Dr. Richardson their updated manual. But more importantly, people's mindsets are changing. They're understanding why these changes matter. Jamie, the college student whose live stream had started it all, was now an intern at the terminal's communications department. She had created a powerful social media campaign called "This is What a Professional Looks Like," featuring success stories from diverse travelers. "Your story changed my life," Jamie told Dr. Richardson. "I was going to study business, but now I'm focusing on civil rights law. I want to help make spaces safer for everyone." The British businessman, Dr. Wilson, had kept his promise. His hospital board had implemented new anti-bias protocols that were being adopted by medical facilities across the country. "It's like dominoes," he explained via video call. "Once one institution shows real change is possible, others follow." Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who had spoken up that day, now led a senior citizens advocacy group that taught other retired professionals how to be active allies. "We've seen too much in our lives to stay quiet," she told her growing membership. The charter company's scholarship program had already selected its first recipients, 10 promising students from underrepresented backgrounds who dreamed of careers in aviation. Their photos hung in the terminal lobby, a reminder that change wasn't just about fixing the present, but about building a better future. Dr. Richardson's daughter Zara had started a nationwide college movement called Speak Up, Stand Up. Student groups across the country were organizing workshops about active intervention when witnessing discrimination. "Mom," Zara had told her, What happened to you that day is helping other students find their voice. We're learning that staying quiet isn't being neutral, it's being part of the problem. The terminal's new training program included regular feedback sessions where staff could discuss challenging situations and learn from each other. Officer Rodriguez led many of these sessions, sharing his experience of choosing to speak up against a colleague's wrong actions. It's not enough to not be racist, he told each new group. We have to be actively anti-racist. That means speaking up even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. The charter company CEO had kept his word about systemic changes. Every private terminal in their network now had a diversity officer and a clear reporting system for discrimination. Security cameras were monitored not just for threats, but for signs of bias in how passengers were treated. Ms. Brooks had created a monthly open terminal event where high school students from underserved communities could learn about careers in aviation. Sometimes people don't dream certain dreams because they don't see themselves in those roles, she explained. We're changing that. As Dr. Richardson prepared to board her flight that day, she noticed something else new in the terminal, a wall of testimonials from passengers sharing their positive experiences. Among them was a quote from that difficult day: "Change happens when we choose to stand together." The young security officer checking her ID smiled warmly. "Thank you for helping us learn to be better," she said. She was part of the new hiring wave, professionals from diverse backgrounds who were changing the face of aviation security. Dr. Richardson smiled back, remembering how different things had been just a month ago. Sometimes the worst moments could lead to the best changes, if people were brave enough to learn from them. 3 months after the incident, Dr. Richardson stood once again in JFK's private terminal. This time, she wasn't alone. A group of young medical students followed her, part of a new mentorship program that showed promising professionals how to navigate spaces that weren't always welcoming. "This is where it happened," she told them, gesturing around the now transformed terminal. "But more importantly, this is where change began." The terminal looked different now. The cold, formal atmosphere had been replaced with warmth and inclusivity. Photos of diverse professionals lined the walls, and a large sign read, "Your success has a home here." But the real changes were in the people. Ms. Brooks approached the group with a tablet in hand. "Dr. Richardson, I thought you'd like to see these numbers," she said proudly. "Complaints about discrimination are down to 0 in the past 2 months. And look at our customer satisfaction scores, highest in the company's history." Sarah, now the head of customer relations, was leading a training session nearby. Through the glass walls, they could see her using the terminal incident as a teaching moment. The company had turned their mistake into a model for change that other businesses were eager to copy. Jamie, the student who recorded the original video, was there too. She had just finished her first year of law school and was interning at a civil rights firm. "That day changed everything for me," she told the medical students. "I learned that one person with a phone and a conscience can help start a movement." The security team was unrecognizable from 3 months ago. Officer Rodriguez had been promoted to Chief of Security Training, and his diverse team reflected the passengers they served. They didn't just check IDs, they made every traveler feel welcomed and respected. "Remember Thomas Wells?" Officer Rodriguez asked Dr. Richardson quietly. "He's been reaching out to airports, trying to get his job back, but now they all have strict anti-discrimination policies. Sometimes consequences are the best teachers." Mrs. Thompson's senior advocacy group had grown into a national organization. Today, she was in Washington, D.C., testifying before Congress about age and race discrimination. Her grandson's news channel carried the live coverage on the terminal's TV screens. Dr. Richardson's daughter Zara called with exciting news. Her Speak Up, Stand Up movement had spread to over 500 colleges. "Mom," she said, "they want you to be the keynote speaker at the national conference. Your story is still inspiring people." The British businessman, Dr. Wilson, had kept his promise too. His hospital network had implemented the most comprehensive anti-bias training program in the medical field. Other hospitals were following suit, creating what medical journals were calling the Richardson Protocol for Professional Inclusion. As Dr. Richardson watched her mentees explore the terminal, she noticed something beautiful happening. These young doctors to be walked with confidence, their backs straight, their heads high. They didn't expect to be questioned or stopped. In just 3 months, this space had been transformed from a place of confrontation to a place of possibility. Captain Chen, still flying the same route, stopped to greet the group. You know, he told the students, that day didn't just change this terminal. It changed how we think about our responsibility to each other. One person's dignity is everyone's business. The terminal's new motto was displayed prominently. Everyone's success takes flight here. It wasn't just words. The charter company had created scholarship programs, mentorship opportunities, and career development paths for underrepresented groups in aviation. As Dr. Richardson prepared to board her flight with her mentees, she overheard one of them say, "I can't believe this all started because you stood your ground that day." "No," she corrected gently. "It started because everyone in this terminal decided to stand together. One person can spark change, but it takes a community to make it last." The afternoon sun streamed through the terminal's windows, casting no shadows this time. Instead, it illuminated the faces of the next generation of professionals, confident, supported, and ready to soar. They were the real legacy of that difficult day 3 months ago. As they walked to their gate, Dr. Richardson smiled at the final photo on the wall. A group shot of everyone who had been in the terminal that day, now labeled "The Day We Chose Change." Below it, a simple message read, "Because we all rise higher when we rise together."